By the way, if you want to find me just before we start, I'm Rob at seekingintegrity.com. This is Tammy at seekingintegrity.com. If you're looking for us, if you have a question that was too embarrassing, uncomfortable, or you didn't feel it was fully answered, drop us a note and we will respond. Glad to help.
At SLAA meetings, some people identify as sex, love, and fantasy addicts. I was under the impression that all of this was rooted in fantasy. I think fantasy dominates my mind, particularly in terms of love addiction. Why do some particularly identify as fantasy addicts? How is that different from just a sex and love addict? That's a great question.
Well, I think that, so first of all, love addiction, you're right, it's all about fantasy, right? Because if I have some idea that having sex with a stranger is going to mean this or that, or it's a fantasy. If I have some idea that some love or romantic connection, I don't really know what those things are going to bring. It's all fantasy, especially for addicts. But you asked a really good part of that question I wanted to relate to, which is, so when I think about this question in my world, I think about people who, for example, I know people who have to stop masturbating because they have such an ability to use intense fantasy to recall imagery that for them it doesn't matter whether they're looking at porn or not, or they're just lost in it. And they have very, very vivid visual memory and imagination. I work with other clients who, if they turn the porn off, they're not interested in sex anymore. They have to, the whole engine goes down. So, and that's a good thing. So there are people who are more engaged in visual fantasy and able to pull up imagery and experiences, and they don't need porn. Sometimes they don't need people. They can just do it all in their heads by themselves. And that's a little bit of what I think about, because all addiction is about fantasy. Drinking, using, all of it. The idea that going and doing this is somehow going to make me feel better or happier, or that's a fantasy, and the reality is when we go do the addictive things, 9 times out of 10, we end up feeling worse, or they don't bring us what we want. And so the fantasy is not realized. Of course, once in a while it is. Once in a while you will have a good sexual experience. Once in a while the drinking will work, and that will make you chase that good experience forever, because one good experience is, unfortunately, the way human beings are built, one good experience and a whole bunch of bad ones will chase that good experience forever. And that might be another form of fantasy addict, by the way, the person who is able to see someone as being different than they are. I know people who are so invested in their love relationships that they truly are unable to see how abusive they are, or how much abuse they experience, or anything like that. And so their fantasy about what the relationship is so radically different than the reality of their relationship. By the way, most of us who use fantasy, really the best way to get around that is to have other people around to help us. So if I have some fantasy that this affair is doing this for me, but I let my friends and colleagues, my recovering friends know, they're going to say, I don't think that's so good for you. In other words, getting feedback busts fantasies. Anyway, that was my best shot for that question.
That's great. So, and then this isn't a question, but it says, we are so lucky that you guys and your team provide this service. We use your services in this website constantly. Thanks.
Glad to help.
We don't have any other questions right now, so I'm going to talk more about the services that we have on sexandrelationshiphealing.com.
Which are all free.
Yes, and you mentioned the podcast, and there are a lot of great podcasts, and I do frequently get messages from people who have discovered the site through the podcasts, and they are a wide range. It isn't all about sex or being betrayed or any of, there's just good relationship stuff too. So invite you to listen to that series. But we have drop-in groups, and I want to talk a little bit about those, because those are specifically designed for whatever you would identify. If I identify as being a female partner, there's betrayed partner drop-in groups where I can go on there and I can share my camera or not, but I can get support and provide support for other people, who are like me. If you're a female sex and love addict, we've got a group for that. If you're a male partner, we've got a group for that. If you're
professionals,
professionals, we have a password protected group for like licensed professionals, like mental health professionals, physicians, attorneys, judges, that type of professional. We have a gay man's group that, so if you identify as a gay man struggling with sex and intimacy disorder, that's a great group too. So all of these places are safe places for you to go to, where you can talk about what's going on and provide support or get support.
And those discussions are not recorded. It's
Those
not
are
like
not
this.
recorded.
We only record the educational sessions. So this is a Q&A where none of you are seen and none of your names are seen. So we record this so people can come back and listen to it or listen to the questions. But in the drop-in groups, they're completely confidential. We don't record.
Yes. Yes, we don't even know what's talked about unless we happen to go into
one. We do provide all of the volunteer therapists, and we do pay the ones who don't volunteer. And you might ask, why do we do that? And I'm going to give you the same answer that I always give, which is there isn't enough support on the planet for all the people who have questions about sex, intimacy, relationships, and sexual health. And we have the time to be able to give this, offer this. A lot of my colleagues do. We want you to have a community. That is really the goal, to build a community where you can reach out and find each other for support. And I know a lot of you spouses, if there are any wives or husbands out there, you may not feel like you need the connection. You may feel like it's the person who's done all the crazy behavior. They need to go get help. But I want to tell you, if you've been living with a crazy person, you're going to get a little crazy too. And so getting that support from other partners, so many of the questions you ask really are questions that every partner asks. And that's not to put them down. It's just more to say you're not alone. And I can answer questions, glad to, but there's something else when, for example, if you're an attractive woman in your 40s who've been cheated on and you think, oh my God, he's cheating or she's cheating because I'm not attractive anymore. Or I'm not as young as I was. And then you see another attractive, interesting 40-year-old woman who's been cheated on in the same drop-in group. It's like, oh, wait a minute, she's nice. She got you. Wait a minute, maybe it isn't me. And that reducing of that feeling of what did I do wrong? How is it my fault? None of us really made any of this happen. If someone cheats on you, that's their choice, not yours. There are a lot of things that an unhappy person can do if they're miserable in their relationship, even if they're not having sex. They can go work out, they can exercise, they can find a therapist, they can get a divorce. Unfortunately, a lot of our spouses and partners who are sex addicts feel like the only thing they can do is say how unhappy they are with us and then justify that to go get what they want. And that can leave us feeling pretty bad. And that's why we want you to support each other.
And I think one of the things with supporting each other too is, if I ask a question, somebody can share what worked or didn't work for them, and that is very powerful and would give me a different perspective than a professional doing that. Now, we do have professionals in the rooms. We want them to be a safe space. We want it to be a certain way. So, that's why they're there, but they're not there doing therapy. They're not, this is
monitors.
Yeah, it really is. It's just to facilitate. So.
And I want to say again to every partner who says, what did I do to make this happen? Or why did this happen to me? Or to sit in a room full of other men and women. And if you're a man, you're going to be with men. If you're a woman, because we have drop-in groups for both. To have that experience of, oh, wow, this happened to them. And sometimes, it's hard for me to feel, sometimes for some of us, it's hard for me to feel bad about myself. But I can feel really badly for that other person and begin to understand what's really going on. So anyway, for every reason we encourage connection at Seeking Integrity, that's what the work is all about. So I think we have questions.
We do. So what is the difference between acting out with fantasy masturbation, and I got it, and with a sex addiction, and someone who isn't addicted who uses fantasy with masturbation? So if I'm a sex addict and I use fantasy masturbation versus just somebody who doesn't.
Well, can I tell you first that I'm drinking Fresca? Do you ever drink Fresca?
Oh, I wondered what that was. It looked like I thought it might be lemonade.
Tab and Fresca. Sorry.
Tab before they changed the formula.
Yeah.
What is the cancer-causing stuff?
So the person who's not addicted, who's using fantasy masturbation is, let me take a step back and explain what addiction is. Many people drink, but they're not alcoholic. Many people gamble, but they're not compulsive gamblers. Lots of people go out and have casual sex, even they have affairs, whatever. They're not sex addicts. So what makes someone an addict? And I think it's hard if you're not an addict to understand it. It's very hard because to you, I can just put that glass of wine down, or I don't have to call that sex worker, or I can go to bed without looking at porn. So why can't he or she? And it is really hard as human beings, as hard as we try, for us to understand the inside of someone else's brain. You just can't. Especially if you don't have the problem that they have, you really don't get it. Because you're like, I can stop that anytime. Why can't they? So let me tell you why. And I'm going to use alcohol as an example. Maybe Tammy can weigh in. I'm not an alcoholic. So I do like the occasional half a glass of wine. To be honest, if I have a whole glass, I get tired and a headache. But if I have half a glass, it's kind of okay, So for me, Having a half a glass of wine with friends over dinner is fun. It's relaxing. It lowers my social inhibitions. It takes a little bit of the tension off. Maybe my blood pressure goes down a little. In other words, alcohol for me is a way to relax with friends. And I don't drink too much because then it's not fun anymore. Most people, whether they're having a few beers watching football, or they're toasting a champagne glass at their daughter's wedding, or they're using the alcohol to celebrate, to build bonds, to build relationships. You might even get drunk together to get laid and feel good about it. But the alcohol has a primary purpose of fun, entertainment, being social, connecting, but not for the alcoholic. If you're the alcoholic at that same party where everybody else is drinking for fun and distraction and to enjoy and social and all that, you're drinking just to feel okay. So if you're an alcoholic, if you're not an alcoholic and you drink occasionally, you're drinking for the fun of it. If you're an alcoholic and you're drinking to feel okay. You use the alcohol for a different reason than everybody else does. You might start out drinking just like everybody else. It's fun, but you quickly find out it does a whole different thing for you than it does for other people. Before you know it, the alcohol is very, very important to you just for feeling okay. I'm a sex addict. If I go have sex with strangers, or I go out and act out, I'm not doing that for the same reason. Well, let me give it to you this way. If I was a single man and free as a bird and wanted to go find someone to be sexual with, then who cares? I mean, I might do it for fun. I might do it to find a relationship. I might do it because I want to physically bond. Many reasons why I might have sex with a stranger or a date. But if I'm a sex addict, I'm doing it to feel okay. I'm having sex not to have fun, not to be social, not to recreate, not to procreate. I'm doing it just to feel like I feel okay. So the person who uses porn or fantasy for masturbation occasionally is just doing that as a release and to have some fun and a good fantasy. And then they go back to, and maybe they're a little bit relaxed. They had sex. But a sex addict is using it to escape emotionally, to escape from what they're feeling, to regulate their emotions. We have a phrase in therapy called secondary gain. When you do something that everyone else is doing, but you do it for another reason, you don't do it for the primary reason like fun, you do it for the secondary reason like, unless I drink, I feel horrible. So everyone else who drinks or has sex or doesn't have that secondary reason. They're just drinking because it's fun, or they go gambling once in a while because it's fun, or they go have sex for whatever. But people who are addicted are doing it for their own emotional stability. And that's a whole different reason for drinking, using sex, and gambling than the person who's just out for fun. So the person who's just masturbating to porn for fun, they're just having the person who's doing it regularly is using that part of their brain and that neurochemistry to emotionally stabilize. It's almost like taking an antidepressant. They're doing it for a different reason than the person who's just going out to have a little bit of sex. And that was a long-winded explanation, but was that helpful, Tammy?
Yeah, I was, well, when you're talking about drinking half a glass, I was like, can't relate, no, yeah. I mean, I spent most of my day planning drinking, recovering so I could plan the next day so I could drink. So that was,
Right, and so I would go out with friends, and we might or might not have a drink, and that is all that anything had to do with drinking. Very different.
Relate, yeah.
Very different motivations.
Does an SA need to get to the root of their trauma to ensure good recovery?
Right. So I don't know what getting to the root of trauma means. So let's talk about it. Are we best off in recovery if we have early trauma like abandonment or abuse of some kind? Is it really good for us to take a look at it, to understand it, to look at how it has affected today, and maybe even if useful, do some trauma work in therapy around it? Sure. It's great stuff. You're going to be a better person. You're going to be more whole. You're going to be more relaxed. You're going to be more engaged. You're going to be more integrated. Do you have to go through every single detail of the trauma in exquisite detail and be in absolute agony like it's happening today? No. There are many ways to work with trauma that don't involve getting to the very nth of it and walking through every detail. And we have some very excellent forms of dissociative treatments like EMDR that help you distance yourself from the trauma and be able to look at it in a less intense way. So there was a time in our field, in the therapy field, addiction field, in the 90s and early 2000s, where the whole idea was come into treatment and throw it all up. You're going to beat bats on chairs, and you're going to yell, and you're going to scream, you're going to get it all out. And that may be nice or interesting, but it doesn't really teach people how to get sober or live their lives when they're feeling stressed. So yes, it's important to understand the trauma. It's important to find a way to tolerate it and live with it, but it's not going away. You know, if I cut my wrist when I was 17, I would still have a scar. And the damage that I have in my brain, and this was just on TV, they were talking about childhood trauma and how people, there was just a study on TV that I saw on TV. A woman was talking about PTSD, and she's found out that those people who really get stuck in PTSD, as opposed to those who, let's say, go through an earthquake or a war and they don't, are very often people who have early childhood trauma. So someone who has early trauma, their brain has already rebounded, reacted, high cortisol levels. They've already been in trauma. Maybe they were 4. Now they're 28 or 18. They go to war, and it's like re-injuring the brain. So they get stuck in PTSD, whereas some people who had really good, or at least in the study, more people who had solid, supportive, nurturing upbringings didn't get PTSD. So my point is the brain is already vulnerable from childhood injury, addiction, or PTSD, or depression, or, you know, there's a whole variety of ways that might play out in adult life.
That's fascinating. I'd like to see that information too. Okay.
I love fascinating you, Tammy. That's good.
Here's one. I'm a gay man in a marriage of 14 years. After D-Day 6 months ago, I got full disclosure last week. My husband has been out of the home for this time, and now I am thinking of reintegrating him back in. We are both in CSAT therapy, but I am not sure I want to stay in the relationship, although I'd like to give it some time. Do you have any recommendations about reintegration? Prodependence has really helped me through this, by the way. That's great.
Oh, thanks. I'll mention that in a minute. So when I think of couples reintegrating if they've been living apart, I think about dating. I think about starting all over again on some level. It's kind of like, let's spend an evening together. Let's spend 2 evenings together. Let's hold hands, like really taking it slow. And so I think if you think about it that way, like we're going to start dating as if we were starting all over again. No sex, just like go to a movie or then you have the time. You don't have to make a decision right now whether you want to be with this person the rest of your life. You can get to know him or her in recovery as you're dating him or her. And as you go along, check things out in therapy, check things out with them. You may be able to evolve a new and different relationship with this person now than you ever thought you would have before. And if you're not sure you want to stay, getting to know them again in this more kind of formal way will probably help your thinking about a more objective way to look at them. So I think that you don't have to make a decision, but get to know the person again and see what place they have in your life. And that'll probably be a lot easier on both of you.
I think that's a great answer too. So somebody would like to know, and I would too, do you remember what the name of the documentary is? What was it you saw?
You're talking about PTSD?
Yeah.
No, this was a study. I saw it on, I think it was on 60 Minutes or CBS, but pretty sure it was on CBS News. But if you I would Google PTSD childhood trauma study, and you'll probably find it's a study. So, a lot of times when folks like us get our PhDs or do our dissertations or whatever, we come up with information that we've studied. And we often will put that out in an article or write it into a book, and that's how facts make it into the popular culture. So, for example, I did my dissertation on codependency, or what I thought codependency might be. And out of that, I wrote a book called Prodependence, and to begin to shift the conversation to a different way of dealing with loving a partner who's addicted. So this person probably did their dissertation on these issues. And Tammy, you found the study?
No, I didn't. I'm going to look that up, but I figured, no, somebody did. Oh, good.
I thought I saw something in the chat that someone found.
That wasn't me, so.
Okay. So, but I just saw it on TV, and I thought, and by the way, just so you understand where the field of psychology is, we have recognized PTSD since 1980s. And PTSD literally is the effect of a single or multiple overwhelming events on a person. But we do not have a diagnosis for PTSD that comes out of early childhood trauma. We are still working on that. There are parts of the culture that still resist the idea that, early experiences can lead to later problems. We'll get there, but it's not in there yet. Trauma is trauma. Yeah, we got lots of questions there, Tim.
I am a love addict. I tend to attract avoidance. This is my first time being with a partner who has similar attachment style as me, who is more anxious. It comes with its own set of issues, but different. What have you seen as common issues with two anxious attachment style partners, and any tips for coping?
Well, I think I'm a little anxious attached in my relationship. And, So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And maybe I don't know exactly what you mean, but I'll tell you what it is for me. I'm someone who really needs somebody around a lot. I like my space, but I really like have my spouse around, and I really like being home together. And I don't understand these couples that go on separate vacations. Like, why go on a vacation if you can't go with the person? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense to other people, not to me. So I'm someone who, and it relates to the abandonment trauma that I had as a child, and why I picked this person who likes being home and likes spending time just with me. It fits. I wouldn't say that that's a bad thing. I would just say, in my relationship, we're both aware that we have these issues. So how do we make sure that we are more social, that we get out, that we invite people in, that we don't just make it about the two of us? We acknowledge what the challenges are being who we are, and then we look at, well, what do we need to do together to work around those? So here's another one. I could sit at my computer for 4 hours while my spouse sits across the table on his computer for 4 hours, and we would never talk to each other. But we would feel perfectly satisfied because we spent the evening together. Now, most people would say that doesn't sound very satisfying, but believe me, to someone like me, it's very satisfying. It's all I want. However, it's not enough for a relationship. It's okay for an evening, but we still have to connect. So we know that we're vulnerable to spending a lot of time together without necessarily communicating. And we feel like, this is my coupleship, my partnership, we feel like we're connected, but we're actually not talking about a lot of stuff we need to talk about. So knowing this allows me to say, okay, we're going to have our numb time when we're sitting watching TV and we're not communicating, we're on the computers, and because that's who we are, and that works for us, whereas other couples it wouldn't work for at all, but it works for us. However, we have to make sure that we have the communication time, that we put that in, knowing our vulnerabilities, we have to make sure to make up for them. And so I would say to you, whatever anxious avoidance means to you and your husband or spouse, what might that lead to that you need to anticipate and work around and be consistent with is what I think about. And I don't know what it is for you. You have to figure that one out for you and him or her.
Is anyone ever really friends with an ex, or are these friends just being kept around as backup?
I feel like there's an agenda in that question. Don't you, Tammy? I just feel like there's a person out there who has a friend that someone else doesn't like that they have. And I'm just guessing. I could be wrong. So let me answer the question. First of all, I hope people do have relationships with their exes. A lot of exes are co-parents and have relationships are important and necessary. And and I do think that this is a challenge for us, because you partners, you don't trust us, nor should you. And yet, past partnerships, past relationships can be really meaningful and important. So I guess it would matter. I think in some ways it's individual. How much do you know the other person? How much has trust been gained with your spouse? I am still friends with my first partner 40 years ago. I mean, we were really good friends, a woman. And, but I don't think that's a threat to her marriage. It's certainly not a threat to my marriage. And we reconnected 10 or 20 years after we separated. So, there wasn't any energy that was going on that continued. There was a period of cooling off and then reconnecting. So I think that if it's an ex with whom there's been some real time and real space, and now they have their own life and you have your own life, and you as a partner are engaged in this process, it's not secretive, who cares? There's no right or wrong. But if you don't trust him or her yet, if you feel like they're going to still lie to you, if you're not sure something might be going on, then it's best that they don't do it. Not necessarily because they're going to get into an affair with this former friend or whatever lover, but more because it'll make you anxious every time they go see them. And that's not good for your relationship. So even if it is healthy and appropriate for the person in your life to be in contact with their ex, it may not be good for your relationship, especially in the beginning. And sometimes I've worked with clients who have to give up a friendship that was not sexual because it made their spouse so uncomfortable. And the bottom line is, my responsibility is to my primary relationship, not to some friend from 20 years ago.
This question is, then how is it not about sex? That one still stumps me. So how is sex addiction not about sex?
Oh, this is a different question.
I know. It goes, yeah.
Well, so sex addiction is about the idea of sex. It's about the fantasy of sex. It's about the excitement around sex. If you're a sex addict, you understand that you've probably spent hours or days or weeks looking, cruising, online, blah, blah, and then 10 minutes having sex. So if you spend 4 days setting it up and 5 minutes having it, how can you be at the sex? Maybe it's more about the whole process. We have a name for these kinds of addictions: gambling, gaming, sex, eating, and spending. We call them process addictions. That's actually what they're called. And they're called process addictions because the person who has the addiction to gambling or sex is not just addicted to the gambling or the sex, it's the whole process that they're addicted to. The looking, the getting the money out of the bank, the hiding, the going to the right casino, calling the stockbroker. There are rituals and fantasies, and all that is very rich in acting out for that person. So if I were to go sexually act out, yes, the end point and the object of the fantasy would be sex. But most of my time would actually be spent thinking about it, planning it, organizing it, wanting the sex, maybe not so much. So if you look at the big picture, it's much more about the whole process of it. These are fantasy-based addictions. The actual behavior, getting the food in your mouth, going and playing the blackjack, secondary. But everything that leads up to it, that's really what it's about. Losing yourself for as long as possible in the fantasy.
So this person says, I'm going to start legit SLAA, hopefully this week in the next town over. I'm very familiar with the concepts, been following here and on Tuesday night and in the rooms, and I'm feeling really asexual, really out of it, no drive for my addictions, masturbation, sex, love, fantasy, etc. What is going on with me? This is a female.
Well, I don't know how long you've been around this process of healing and recovery, but if it's new to you, what you might be having is a honeymoon. It's not unusual. Hold on. Do you mind if I let the dog in? Hold on 1 second.
Oh, that's fine. So,
thank you. Come on, dog. Get in here. Come on. Oops.
Hi, Dozer.
So, sorry. Back to the question. He
Yes.
said to go outside and bark anyway.
Yeah.
So, many of us who have addictions, who have lived with our addiction by ourselves in secrecy for a very long time, especially sex and love addiction. So if I'm a sex addict, I have hidden my behavior. I have done things no one knows about. I have a whole retinue of behaviors no one knows about. I certainly have secrets from my spouse, my partner, my friends, everybody. So imagine the person, forget the addiction, okay? Just say there's a person who has been keeping secrets for years from their friends, from their family. They've been living a double life. And all of a sudden, they have this opportunity to unburden themselves. Now they get to get it all off their chest, get it out there, and have the opportunity to live one life where there are people who know about it and they have hope for change and they know they don't have to live this way. So when people find recovery, find that there is a process, identify what the problem is, I'm a sex addict, I'm a love addict, understand that there's hope, that they can do something about it, that they can get well and all of that, it tends to be in the beginning that many of us go into a honeymoon. And so for the first 6 weeks, 2 months, maybe a couple of months, it's like, oh, this was easier than I thought. I'm not having sex. I'm not drinking. And I have all these friends around, these new people who are supporting me. And wow, this is really great. I don't have any secrets anymore. And we start to feel better. We feel less depressed. We feel less anxious. We feel more integrated. And a lot of the needs that we had to run around and act out with our addiction diminish because we're getting support, because we're opening up. But over time, that honeymoon will fade. Life is what it is. It brings up stress. It brings up anxiety. And that honeymoon period is to do exactly what you're doing. Get yourself to the meeting, the real meeting, get those people in your life, start working on this, building relationship, building support, because your desire to use or act out will come back. I guarantee it. And you want to use this time when you're feeling like, oh, everything's great. This is when you need to dig in and do the hard work. Get those friendships going, get to those meetings, get those patterns and habits in place that secure and stabilize you so that when you have the desire to act out again, and you will, that you have all of this built up underneath you, because it will be back.
So the next question is, my husband has been in a sex addiction inpatient recovery for nearly 2 months. I have no disclosure as of yet. I need disclosure to heal. The current place he is in feels like they are focused on the addict. My husband says he needs to come home in a couple of months, and then we need to rebuild and get on our relationship rebuilding, and then disclosure happens at that point. I don't want to be in person with him when he gives me disclosure. I would rather have a letter. He says if we can't do it this particular way, then it isn't happening. I don't see a question there, but can you talk about the disclosure?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me, I don't know your situation. I don't know where your husband's in treatment. Probably not with us, because I know.
No.
But
well, and it wouldn't have been for 2 months.
And it would have been for 2 months.
Our program's shorter.
But regardless of that, So of course you want disclosure. Of course you want the information. Of course you want it in a private, personal way so you can sit with it and come to terms with it. Here's the thing. Back in the old days, and I've been doing this work for 25 years, I've run treatment centers, whatever your husband's going through, I've probably run the group at one point or another, or wife, husband, I think. We used to do disclosures while people were in treatment. We used to call someone at home or have someone at home come visit. And you have to understand, you would be the person who is on the end of a phone line at home or has a letter in your hand, and you're alone with no support or sitting around with a couple of kids under the age of 8. And you read or hear some of the worst information devastating you about what your spouse has been doing that you don't know about. Who's going to support you? This is our concern. This is why we don't do disclosure like that. Because if I want you, the spouse, with a therapist, I want you having seen a therapist for a period of time, not for you, not because you have some major issue, but because you're going to have to get ready to hear this information. And then you're going to have to know how you're going to handle it. What are you going to do afterwards? And we have a whole process in which we do disclosure. And it isn't just about the person getting a list together and reading it to you. And if it were, it would be much easier. A lot of what we've evolved over the last number of years is about protecting you. Because as much as you want the information, it might devastate you. As much as you want the information, it might not be something you can handle hearing home alone. And so we don't do disclosures when partners aren't around. We're long distance. We don't do them while people are in residential treatment. We do them once the person gets home and there's some stability and you, the partner, are getting help and the process takes place. Now, I can understand saying, well, until he does disclosure, I don't want to live with him. Fine, he can live somewhere else. I can understand, I'm not sure I want to stay married until disclosure happens. That's fine too. You can stay separated. There are no, not doing, his coming home doesn't mean you have to strike up your relationship, but everything's great and then you're going to do this horrible disclosure thing. As I said earlier, I think when someone comes back from treatment or when you guys are restarting your relationships, it's a lot like dating. It's like getting to know each other again. And disclosure can be a good part of that. You're certainly getting to get to know a lot about each other in that process. But we do it this way to protect you as much as you would want to hear it. We don't want you hearing it alone. We don't want you hearing it out of context. We don't want you to hear it when you can't ask that person questions about, what did you mean by this, or clarify. So there are reasons why we do it the way we do it. And I don't know the treatment center, but I would handle it the same way.
And I think, well, first of all, there's a podcast on disclosure that you did with Mari Lee, so I would invite you to listen to that particular one. But I also think, one of the things about having a qualified team helping both sides prepare for the disclosure is you are able to identify what really is important. The therapist is able to help you clarify that, so that you are getting data and information in a way that you aren't getting overly. One of the things that I talk about sometimes is people get vomit disclosures. That's what I call them, because they get all this stuff that's just vomited on them and there's no filter. And it's not like they go, well, I needed to know those things, but I didn't need to know, Dr. Roberts talked about, breast size and, hair color and all those you don't need to know some of those images that you can't get out of your head. And so it's, I think, really helpful to have it be, well, you do need to know, because this date, he said he was there. Was he really? That type of thing. It's important to help you clarify. And, the crazy making that Dr. Rob was talking about, it can help you go, no, I wasn't crazy. I need to trust my gut. He was, totally lying to me. That's what it's, about, is coming clean and getting a foundation to rebuild or not rebuild a relationship on, depending on, that's entirely up to you.
So, and let me just, I don't think disclosure, I know that you think disclosure is the answer to will you stay or will you go and all those kinds of things. But the reality is that there's so much more that you need to find out about each other than just those facts. That will determine the fate of your relationship. And sometimes those facts can even get in the way in the beginning.
So SA husband says acting out with partners was as if he was watching from the sidelines, not participating. Is that typical?
I'm not sure what that means. Can you interpret?
To me, that seems like I'm voyeuring this rather than like I'm disassociated from the actual what's going on.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether you're saying that your husband was a voyeur and he just
No,
watched.
no, no, no. It just like, I've withdrawn, I've compartmentalized, and
Right.
I'm doing this, but it's not like I'm really attached to it.
Okay, so here's the thing. We have a word. We have words for this. We call it being in the bubble, being in the trance. Some people in 12-step recovery use the word powerless, and what that means is that when we use intense fantasy to emotionally escape, there's a whole bunch of neurochemistry that comes along with that: endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. If you ever see an addict knocking on the door of their dealer's house or on their way into the house of prostitution, their heart's pounding, their pupils are dilated, they're sweating. I mean, they're in a hyper arousal state. And that has to do with all the fantasy about what they're going to go do. That's why I said it's a fantasy-based addiction. So when you're in that state of consciousness, your adrenaline is pumping, you're scared and excited and worried and looking forward to, and intense emotions, lots of heart-pounding excitement, euphoria, fear. And when the person is in that place, they're really not present. It feels like they're at a distance from what they're doing. It is, in a sense, a dissociative state. They're not fully there. And it has to do with the fact that when you get a rush of adrenaline, you're not able to think clearly. If you saw a kid crossing the street and a truck coming, you would have a rush of adrenaline, you'd stop thinking and you would just go run and grab that kid, because that's what we do when we have adrenaline release when we're in fear. And addicts are using fantasy to release both adrenaline and neurochemicals that make them feel good. So when they're looking for their addiction or in their addiction, they're kind of excited, afraid, excited, afraid, excited, afraid. And that consciousness leaves them really feeling spaced out and almost like they're not present at all.
At the beginning of my relationship, I was seeing other people as part of my dating plan. I used to latch on to one person to the point I wouldn't see red flags, so I was trying to change this. I think I may have taken this to an extreme with anonymous sex to be sex positive, no longer feel shame, and this may be due to trauma. I have never had anonymous sex before or been a sex addict, so I didn't see this as an issue. Problem was, I thought I was clear with my now partner that I was sexual with others. To him, I betrayed him. I have never done it since he asked if I was with others and would commit to him. It has been 6 months and he brings it up regularly that I cheated and has intrusive thoughts and affects us in the bedroom. I don't know what parts to take accountability for and what not to.
Okay. So I don't know you and I don't know your situation, but you get to date and have sex with other people if you're not being exclusive with someone, and that's really none of his business. And I'm worried about what you're saying because there are pathological types of jealousy for people, and they can and people who are pathologically jealous can also turn into violence. It can turn into control. It can turn into a whole bunch of other ugly things. And if you did not have an agreement to be monogamous and you did not give someone the impression that you were going to be monogamous and you at a certain point said, okay, now we're going to make, I think this is not your issue. This is his issue or her issue, and they need to go deal with it. So I think I may have taken this to an extreme with anonymous sex to be sex positive. No one feels shame, and this is due to trauma. I never had sex before. I'm just rereading I didn't see this as an issue. Okay, so maybe some of the sex you had when you were dating or, you don't feel so good about now, you're learning about more, but that's your journey, not your partner's journey. So I'm a little concerned about that. I think this is a therapy issue for sure. And I would want to sit down in couples therapy and figure this one out because especially since it keeps coming back, because this is not going to go away for your spouse and it's going to make your life miserable. So I suggest you guys get underneath what's underneath that because there is something underneath it.
How do I know if my desire to start dating again is just my sex and love addiction or a genuine desire to get out there and see how it goes? I'm 6 months in recovery, sober from bottom lines.
Tammy, do you know the answer to that? It's one simple answer. If you don't know, I will tell her.
Well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I think you have a plan, and I think it's one of those you talk to your sponsor, and if your sponsor says it's time, you go.
Yes. So any addict asking this question knows the answer is, healthy answer is, I don't make my dating decisions by myself. I don't decide that I'm ready to date. I have 3 or 4 people in my life who know my history. They're in my groups. They're in my therapy. I have a sponsor. I have a therapist. And I use these people to consult with to let me know if they think I'm ready to date. Because left to my own devices, I'm probably going to make the wrong decision. But this is why we have a recovery community. This is why we have each other. This is why we have these drop-in groups. So you can say, hey, how would I know if I'm ready to date? And there are other, left to my own devices, I'm not going to make the best decisions around this. Left to her own devices, Tammy would be hanging out in a bar right now. So she had to have a lot of guidance, a lot of support, a lot of direction. And when she felt like drinking, she had people to call. And it's the same thing with our recovery as well. So the answer is, I don't know if you're ready to date or not, but hopefully if you're working your recovery in a good way, there are people who know you so well and know your history and know your struggles who absolutely will have that answer for you, but it isn't going to be us and it isn't going to be you.
And have a dating plan. Dr. Rob has talked on previous webinars about a dating plan. So rather than going off willy-nilly, I would make sure that you and your sponsor and your posse have all consulted on the dating plan.
And what is a date? And what is a date? Is a date going out to a romantic restaurant with candles and moonlight on Saturday? And no, it's, tell me what's a date?
A very well-lit, ugly place with separate cars so that you can come and go, and it's a specified time, and if things go well, a plan for another not highly romantic second
outside
date.
A walk.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Think deli, think
yes.
I'm not saying McDonald's, but think a deli, think coffee shop. That's it. It's just getting to know somebody.
McDonald's.
Daylight is better.
Daylight, yes. Bright fluorescent, ugly lights. All good. Okay, my husband is a porn addict who hasn't watched porn in a few years, but he is not in active recovery. He is in denial about his addiction and is resentful. He is unable to watch it. He is still displaying addiction, narcissistic behavior, denial, blame shifting, gaslighting, projection, etc. I think he may be using me as a substitute for porn. For example, he wants me to stimulate him, says it's my duty, but he isn't interested in mutual play, and he would rather me to do that to him many times a day. He also told me that if I don't, he won't be happy. He would rather have me do things to him than have sex.
Okay, so your husband just sounds like an asshole. I mean, excuse my language, but here's somebody who has a problem and so we have a phrase in AA. It's called being a dry drunk. And what it means is the person who has stopped drinking, but they didn't look at any of the emotional problems that drove them to drink or any of the emotional or relationship problems they caused by drinking. They just stopped. And so what often happens when we refer to someone as a dry drunk is they're often irritable, miserable, kind of secretive, difficult people because they haven't looked, they've just stopped the only thing that made them feel better, but they haven't looked at any other way to feel better. They haven't grown as people. They haven't worked on themselves. And so, my beliefs about a relationship would be it's not enough for my spouse to stop whatever the problem behavior is. I want them to work on being a better person. And the problem, addiction is a symptom of something. It's not the problem. I mean, it is the problem. It's the leading problem. It's the leading edge of a much bigger person problem. So good that he stopped the porn. Does he realize that he has a much larger emotional intimacy relationship problem that was driving the porn use? And now that he stopped, now he has to look at everything underneath and also build a lot of supportive relationships because isolation is not good for you, for him, or any of this. So what I hear is somebody who stopped the most difficult part of the behavior that was causing the most consequences, but has not done a whole lot more than that. And those people tend to be kind of miserable. And he's going to go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, and make everybody around them miserable too. So. Right.
And I, by the way, I wanted you to trust your gut around, I feel like he wants to use me for sex. You said it. Look, I'm glad to trade with my partner. It could be Monday night, it's your night, and I'm going to perform all over you sexually, make you have a great night. And Tuesday, it's my night, and that's great. That's mutual, but not, right? It's mutual, it's focused. In other words, it's still mutual. But if he's saying, look, just focus on me, and after all, you're the woman, so that just speaks a lot to asshole to me. So I have to think, what kind of person are you with? And is he a kind person? Is he a good person? Does he mean to do these things to you? Does he understand how his lack of insight into his behavior and his lack of personal growth is affecting the relationship? And I want to say, I ranted. Tammy, did you know I did a rant on In the Rooms Friday?
No.
I did a rant.
Okay.
And so, I'm going to rant. I'll do the same rant. I'll do a little bit of the same rant I did on Friday. I show up on In the Rooms, which is another online site on Fridays. And I had 120 people. and a question like this came up. And so I just got a little ranty, so I'm going to rant a little bit. So I say to you ladies, to the wives, or those who've been cheated on in the room, my opinion about you: you're much too easy on us. You let us get away with too much. You forgive us too much. You overlook too many things. You think that we're going to make this better without a lot of pressure from you, and we're not. Um, Here's the deal about addicts when they're active in their addiction. If we just think you're nagging us, we just think you're bothering us, we just wish you'd give us a break so we can do what we want to do. And all of that stuff you do, that, can you stop and pay attention to me? It's just wah in our head, because we're focused on what we're doing. And in fact, we like putting you down and devaluing you because that makes us feel more entitled to go what we want to do. So I wouldn't be, so if I were looking for real healing from my partner, I would be looking for someone who wanted to be more relational, more personal, more engaged. I wouldn't be looking for him to change. I would be looking for him to look up and say, I want more from our relationship than I'm getting. It doesn't sound like that's what's happening. So, there's more going on here than porn. There's more going on here than porn. And he's going to have to work on it. If you want a better relationship, you probably both are.
Yeah, I'm trying not to rant on it's my duty.
Good rant.
I will, because like it's I think our duty is to the relationship. And we've talked about the Dr. Stan Tatkin podcast, but if we're both in our, I deserve this, I want this, you need to do this for me. Yeah, that doesn't serve the relationship. And this is so one-sided. And, our duty is to do the best we can for the relationship. It sounds like it's very one-sided. So.
And I want to, a lot of you ask this question. So let me just say this. A lot of you say, okay, well, my husband or wife stopped the behavior, and they've been going to some meetings, and it's been 6 months or a year, or 8 months, and they're in therapy, but they're still a jerk. They're still narcissistic. They're still not invested. They still aren't coming, won't help out around the house. So there is a difference between early recovery and long-term recovery. Early recovery means in the first 6 months or so, you learn how to stop the behavior, you learn the meaning of it and how you've hurt people, you start to live your life differently so it doesn't reoccur. But the part about learning how to be a better person takes longer. And so I think it's important for you spouses to have a dual expectation. One, we're going to stop the behavior and stop hurting you in that way. But two, that it's going to take us a while to recognize the ways we've been narcissistic or unempathic or disengaged from you, but that at least we know that we act that way and we're trying to make it better. My only concern about the question I just heard is I didn't hear anything about your spouse saying, gee, I want things to get better between us. What I heard him say is, I want you to perform more sex on me. That doesn't sound like the kind of relationship I want to have.
She adds, I've tried explaining how his behavior makes me feel and how offensive some of the things he says are, and I think he just pretends he doesn't understand. Most of the time he's nice, but when he gets resentful, he acts out.
So I wrote a book called Out of the Doghouse, a relationship saving guide for men caught cheating. And I wrote the book for men like this. Now, I don't know who your husband is, if he really does have the capacity or not to be more loving and empathic, but my experience with most men who cheat is they just don't get the degree of the problem they've caused. We think candy, flowers, 90 days, everything's going to be fine. Just get off my back. I'll never do it again. And you think, you ruined my whole life. You've ruined the family. I'll never trust you again. What were you thinking? You've destroyed and we look at you like, what's the big deal? It was just, something in Vegas. So part of the problem, I believe, for a lot of men who've cheated is they don't realize the amount of pain, especially if they cheated on a woman, that they've caused her, that they've rocked her world, that they've left her not trusting anything or believing in anything. And so I wrote this book, and you might give it to your husband. I wrote a book.
She said he read it.
Yeah, so again, I'll say this to you. I have had some men read Out of the Doghouse who are on their second marriages and are now 60 and read the book, turned to me in tears and said, oh my God, now I realize that 25 years ago, I might have been able to save my first marriage if I'd understood what my wife was going through and what she needed from me. It is very disturbing to me that you could be married to someone who could read a book like that and not respond with empathy and compassion. It's disturbing, and it worries me for you.
I'd suggest he reread it and reread it. Okay, next question. Can you say something about what someone has to do to repair a marriage from addiction, and what should the spouse be doing, and is the spouse at fault in any way?
Okay. So repair in the relationship, what the addict needs to do. I wrote a book about this called Out of the
Out of the
Doghouse.
doghouse.
And if you want to understand how to, the right stance, the right place to come from, the right kinds of words to use to repair the kind of relationship damage that we cause when we cheat in the ways we do, it's a really good book to read. It actually explains details about how and why to deal with that. But the other question I think is the one I really want to put a lot of energy on. I've had so many spouses say to me, I know, for example, he's been sober, or he or she's been sober a few months, and I'm afraid, and I'm really still angry, but I'm afraid to nag them. I'm afraid to get angry. I'm afraid to yell at. What if they go back to acting out? What if they still see me as the problem and they justify my anger as a reason to act out? What if they go back to the old girlfriend or whatever because I got mad at them? And so I have to say this very strongly. Every once in a while, I'm going to say it very strongly today. There's absolutely nothing that you, as a friend, a parent, a spouse, a wife, a husband, there's nothing that you can do to make me act out. If I am angry at you, if I am unhappy with you in our relationship, I can get a divorce. I can see a counselor. I can go horseback riding. I can volunteer. I can start working out. There are a million things I can do if I'm not happy with my relationship that may or may not help. But the automatic response to unhappiness in a relationship is not to cheat. So this is where I think addicts try to push back on partners' anger. Is we'll say, oh, well, if you keep doing that, I might end up acting out, or you better stop getting so. You can be as mad as you want. Don't hit, don't devalue someone's humanity, but other than like you're not worth living, or I wish you weren't the father of my children, that's not really, I wouldn't go there. But you don't have to be a happy, smiling face. Why should you be? You've been hurt, you've been let down. It is that person's job to realize that it may be a year or more before you feel close and safe with them again. And that's provided that he or she's doing the things they need to be doing to support you and leave you feeling like they're working on this. If you've been cheated on extensively, your partner who has been doing the cheating is one down in the relationship. They don't want to be. They want to still see themselves as equal, but they can no longer call the shots. You call the shots because they've been lying to you. And it is only when they are able to regain your trust that they once again become equal in the relationship. So no, your man or woman doesn't get to say, oh, well, you're not doing enough and that's why I'm still acting out. You don't have to do anything. You can be angry and hate him. That could be enough. It's his job to get the support, the nurturing, and the stability he needs to get well. And if he's not getting it, and he's not getting it from you, it's not an excuse to act out. He just needs to go find the support and not act out.
So the next question, I'm going to take part of it because I want to.
That's our last question for the night, I think.
Okay. So this person says that her husband has been doing some residential work, and the plan is for this person to stay there for another 3 months. Feeling very lost because I feel like I have to wait for disclosure forever now. How can I deal with not getting answers for this long?
Well, I've been in the treatment industry a very long time. I've run treatment centers and programs. I would not feel comfortable personally extending someone for months and months without their spouse coming out and being involved in the treatment process. So why, wherever your husband or why I think husband is, why have they not invited you there? Have you not spent a few days working on this with him, or several visits? Or, it's one thing to say, I'm not going to let you have disclosure because someone's away for 28 days, and when they come home, they'll work on it. But if somebody's away for months and months and months, that's a different story. If you have the ability to go there and you can participate in treatment with him, that's how I would do it. I wouldn't leave you hanging out to dry while he gets 3 months of treatment and you're out in the dark. So I, as a spouse, would turn to the treatment program and say, okay, 1 month, I get it. There's not a lot of space for me. Maybe I do a couple of phone sessions, whatever, but you're keeping him longer? I need to be involved. And they absolutely should respond to that. I would. You want to take one more question, Tammy?
Okay. All right. I was starting to.
You like to push it. You like to push it, girl. Okay. One more question.
All right. So this one is, I'm a single woman. Hearing all the questions about women being hurt and dismissed is very upsetting. I appreciate the goal of trying to maintain a relationship, but at a certain point, isn't it just reflective of a sexist and misogynistic culture? All I hear in these stories are abuse.
Right. Well, let me tell you the room you're in.
Yes.
You're in the room.
That's what I was writing.
Of people who have profound problems with intimacy and sex, many of whom have cheated profoundly on the people they love, many of whom have sexual abuse or other kinds of abuse in their own history. Most of us don't have a clue how to be intimate, how to be fair, how to be honest, how to be real. We never learned. So I do expect that many of us will treat each other badly without the knowledge of how to do it better. We're here, this is not unlike any, this could be AA, where we're talking about I drove drunk with the kids and I got a DUI and I lost my job and you had to take 2 jobs. And, I understand we're talking about fidelity, but in an addiction room, we're not really talking about misogyny. We're talking about somebody who is so broken that they betray their most intimate partner in order to take a drink, essentially. And that's not really about misogyny. I heard what you said. This man wants this woman to do what he wants, and he doesn't want her to participate, and he just wants her to take care of him. And, I have other names for that. Being a jerk, not considering his spouse's feelings, being narcissistic. He might have some sociopathy. I don't know. But the people who are in this room, I truly believe are trying to get well. And so I don't use the level of judgment. I understand what you're saying and how you feel, but I wouldn't necessarily look at it that way. And also you have to understand that the questions you're reading and hearing about are people in their worst moments of their relationships. I really want to remind everyone here that even though you may have been cheated on, even though, there probably still are very intact parts of your relationship that have meaning to you. I know that there are people who have been horribly cheated on, horribly hurt, but they share so much and they care about each other so much that this doesn't define their relationship. It defines a part of their relationship. And I do think that couples have been together for a very long time and you get over 5 or 8 years, you're not just wanting to throw it away, even if your partner has treated you badly. You're more wanting to figure it out and make it better. And by the way, the older we get and the longer we're in relationships, the more we're trying to find reasons to be able to stay in them, not get out of them. So by the time we're in our 40s and 50s, we're not looking to get out of a relationship, we're looking to stay. But if you're in your 20s and 30s, it's more likely you're going to say, oh, who would want to stay in that? So there are also generational things to this as well.
I wanted to add too that this has been more a male addict, female partner. There was a gay couple, but there are plenty of male partner, female
Right.
addicts that come to the site too. So this really is a platform for, whatever relationship you're in. It's a place to find healing, some answers, some dating advice, whatever it is that you need. So I appreciate that you're here. I hope you come back. I hope you listen to some of the podcasts and things, and hopefully it will show it from a slightly different lens.
Yeah, I agree with Tammy. I think just thinking about the fact that we treat a lot of female sex addicts who treat their men like shit and cheat on them and lie to them and all, same stuff. So what we're looking at in this place is much more a mental health and emotional health issue than we are a cultural issue. Thank you all for being here.
We are out of time. Thank you, Dr. Rob, for being here.
Folks, I'll be here next Monday.
Yes,
and I also know that every single week there are multiple meetings on this site for partners, for male addicts, for female. Drop in, join us. We are paying in these people and they're volunteering to help you. So you might as well come help yourselves. And you can find all that on sexandrelationshiphealing.com under webinars. And it's all free. Thanks, Tam.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys. Be well.